You can now find me on RoadStr, the app connecting people through cars.
Hello everybody. For a car obsessive like myself, I have the dream job. I regularly get to drive some of the best cars in the world. However, from time to time an offer comes to me that is simply unbelievable. And today is one of those days. The car I'm about to drive isn't unbelievable because it's fast, rare, or expensive. Those are all very believable things. No, today's car is special because I didn't think they actually made any. What am I talking about? That. It's a Bristol Fighter. It's real, they did make some, this one works, and I get to drive it. But before I do, I want to take a little bit of time to talk to you about the rather unusual company behind the badge. Like many car companies, Bristol's roots were in aviation, as the Bristol Aeroplane Company, manufacturer of many craft used in the First and Second World War, even having a hand in the development of Concorde during its early days. At the end of the First World War, Bristol had suffered heavily because, as demand for their product dropped off, the company and its workforce didn't have anything to do. In the middle of the Second World War, they knew that things couldn't last forever, so they wanted to hatch a plan to keep the company and its staff occupied after hostilities ended. So, a plan was born to go into car making. To expedite the development process, Bristol bought Fraser Nash, who before the war had been the licensed importer of BMWs. So, the first generation of Bristol motor cars were essentially a greatest hits compilation of pieces from various BMs of the era, chiefly the 326, 327 and 328. That's why the cars bear such a strong visual resemblance, and they are beautiful things. But they were not simply copies. Much work was done to improve the mechanical side of things, and Bristols of the time were extremely well regarded, performing favourably with just about anything on the market. A second generation of Bristol landed in the 1960s, now powered by a Chrysler V8, and once again they received favourable reviews, being seen as a worthy comparison to just about anything else on the road. In spite of this, a Bristol was always a very rare thing. It was once said that they would make no more than 3 cars a week, and they only ever had one showroom, on Kensington High Street in London. In the 1970s, the company took on a new owner, and unfortunately, a very different styling direction. The once beautiful, elegant, Jaguar-like curvaceous cars were replaced with a series of what I can only call very iffy-looking, overpriced Ford Capri knockoffs that somehow remained on sale until the turn of the millennium. By the time I was a thing and paying attention to cars, Bristol was already a curio, an oddball relic of the past that refused to move on or go to the museum where it belonged. But the company did have one rather spectacular last go at things. This. The Fighter was introduced in 2004, and it's an odd-looking duck. I'd love to tell you that in person it works a lot more than in photos, but it doesn't. The proportions are very unusual. It's only a little bit longer than an Aston Martin Vantage, but about 6 inches narrower than a Ferrari 599. In fact, it's barely wider than a Honda S2000. It's very proto-AMG SLS, and if you told me this was a forgotten Mercedes concept car from the 1990s inspired by the old 300 SL, I would believe you. On paper, though, this could certainly talk the talk, because up front you'd find the Dodge Viper's 8-litre V10, making here 525 horsepower. And if that wasn't enough, there was also an S version with over 600 horsepower, and there was also a rumoured Bristol Fighter T, powered by a turbocharged 1,000 horsepower plus engine, making the car capable, allegedly, of 270 mile an hour. If you were expecting this to be the kind of car, though, that simply had loads of power and no ability to actually put it down to the road, you'd be wrong. The designer was one Max Bostrom, who had several successful racing cars on his CV. The chassis is a steel box section. It's not borrowed from anywhere else. There are integral roll hoops built into it. The bodywork is a mixture of composite and aluminium. There is even carbon fibre up front in the engine bay for the intake. The suspension is double wishbone, front and rear, with anti-roll bars, front and rear. The tyres are 255 section at the front, 285 at the back. It's proper. It also has a rather spectacular interior access by one of the coolest ways of getting into a car, gull wing doors. And if you are thinking there's a long way to reach them, don't worry. They've thought about that too. Thanks to those doors, ingress and egress is rather easier than you might expect, and it actually feels a lot more roomy than you might think too by looking at it. It's a very tall car, though I think they missed a trick by not having glass sections in the roof here like a McLaren 720S. There's still a lot to like though, and it's very, very typical British handmade car in here. So you have this festival of gorgeous leather and materials, including lots of carbon fibre. You can even see the weave through the paint on the doors. That's very cool. The gear lever here is kinked over to the right. This is also taken from the Dodge Viper, where you'd always find it kinked over to the left. The switchgear, again, very typical low-volume British car, a mixture of the delightful and the disastrous. Take these stalks here for the washers and the indicators. They feel like they've come out of a cheap Ford from 20 odd years ago, because they probably have. But then you've got this centre console here, which has these beautiful, clearly low volume production pieces that are absolutely gorgeous. At the bottom you have a traction control dial, which I'm told may be wishful thinking, and I probably shouldn't rely on too much. You've got adjustment for the seat, which is electric, operated by a series of, I'm pretty sure, Ford window switches. There are shades of TVR Tuscan here on this unusually shaped steering wheel, because below it you have two gauges. One is for oil temp, and the other I'm not sure I've ever seen on a car before. It's fuel pressure. Up here you have all your regular stuff: coolant, temp, speed, revs, oil pressure and fuel at the top. On the roof you'll then find controls for the two fuel filler flaps, one on each side of the car, and the release for that rear luggage area, which even has a little window on the back a la Lamborghini Espada, making the car just a little bit easier to park. You've got a little bit of storage under here and in here, but that's about it, really. A Bristol has always been many things, but cheap is not one of them. When new, these had a list price of £229,000, making them over £20,000 more expensive than a Ferrari 599. And for that reason and many others, only 13 of these ever found a home before Bristol shut its doors in 2011. Though Bristol's story now looks almost certain to be finished, the Fighter's is not, because in 2019 a company called SLJ Hackett purchased the remaining inventory of Fighter chassis and spares, meaning they've now got the pieces required to make another 6 Fighters, 2 of which are already under construction, with another 2 ready to go. The last 2 chassis will take a little bit more work, but if the demand is there, it can be done. They even have the body shell of the one and only Fighter GT2, the car intended to receive the 1,000 horsepower engine. I got a tour of their workshop earlier today, and it's exactly the sort of place you would imagine it to be, where the old schools of very manual engineering are still alive. They can restore, repair and maintain any type of Bristol ever made, and if a part doesn't exist, they can create it. Richard Hackett, one of the people behind the firm, has a very personal connection to the company too, working there twice, first as a young man, then later, just before they shut the doors and when the Fighter was actually in production. I am particularly grateful to both them and the owner of this car, whose name I don't know, but has let me drive it. So, whoever you are, thank you very much. And I've no doubt whatsoever that you are just as keen as I am to see what it's like. So, no more waiting. Let's drive a Bristol Fighter. Before you've even turned a wheel in the Fighter, you do get a real sense this car is one mixed up cookie, and the people behind it didn't really seem to be able to agree on what it was they were building. Much of the literature of the time talks about it as a supercar, focusing on its big 8-litre 525 horsepower engine and its 210 mile an hour top speed. But to me, just look at it, the exterior, the fact the engine is in the front, not the back, all the leather in here, the luxury trimmings, that all screams GT car to me. And then you've got all sorts of weird stuff, like the fact that, first off, these doors are terrifying. Yeah. Once you're cocooned in, you do also notice a few other things. Most manufacturers with an aviation background like to hint at it in some way, shape or form, and I like what Bristol have done. The most beautiful part of the car for me is this steering wheel, because this little piece of carbon here is designed to evoke the yoke from an old airplane. And actually, I think it's really quite tasteful. It does mean that your thumb rests are unusually low down, but I don't have a particular problem with it. You also have an engine hours meter up here alongside the clock and the outside temperature gauge. I forgot to mention those. This is also the sort of car, certainly on paper, that appeals to the kind of person that thinks all modern supercars are a little bit soft, for the sort of person that thinks maybe even a Noble is perhaps a little bit too safe and easy. And there are a couple of things in here that I think very much support that. For example, my favourite piece of design, the fact that the seatbelt, rather than resting on the traditional sort of torso and shoulder, goes across your neck, ensuring that if you have an accident, you will definitely die, because that's what should happen if you were such a girl you crashed your car. Turn the key too, and you're not met with any sort of synthesized sound. That is the sound of a serious engine doing serious things. This is the sort of thing that appeals to somebody that likes their steak so raw, just hand them the knife, they'll walk into a field and take it from the cow direct. The driving experience, though, is a little bit different. Pulling away is actually rather easy. Once you get over the fact that the clutch travel is inexplicably long, this may have something to do with the fact that even at idle, this car produces 350 pound-foot of torque. At peak, it makes 525. The fact it's also rather narrow and very well sighted out the front means that it's actually nowhere near as daunting to drive on this kind of road as you might expect. Unsurprisingly, the car has lots of shove at more or less any RPM in pretty much any gear. The gear shift itself is pretty decent, although not my favourite. The throttle pedal is also fairly long, sort of TVR-esque really, and when we were doing the drive-bys we actually found out the traction control really does work. It was in wet mode to begin with and it actually was reining things in. It's now set to 15%. 15% what, I really don't know, but it does okay. There's also a surprising amount in here that actually works. The electric mirror adjustment works. The aircon works. Obviously, for the £230,000 Bristol asked when new, you would expect all of these things to work, but it is a low-volume British handmade car after all. These seats are very comfortable. They also feel more GT than supercar. You sit on them, not in them. Very old school. Of all the controls, the one that actually takes the most getting used to is the brakes, and that surprised me. I got out of a Kia Sorento into this, and you would expect the Kia to be the far more heavily servoed item. Actually, it's this. Once you do get used to it, they're okay. They've certainly got plenty of stopping power. These weigh only about 1,500 kilos, and because they're so slippery, contemporary road tests said that over 100 mile an hour, this would have no trouble whatsoever keeping with a Ferrari 599. Given the fact those have another 100 horsepower over the Bristol, that's impressive. The aerodynamics on this car actually really do work too. I've not seen any downforce numbers quoted for it, because it's not that kind of car, but I have seen a coefficient of drag number cited, and that was 0.28. That's very slippery. Around town it actually seems quite mild-mannered, although it is a little bit jittery over the lumps and bumps that you find in your common British street. I'm told the first versions of these cars were rose-jointed, meaning they were very, very unforgiving around town. However, they were a little bit more agile when out and about. The fact is, these were never ever going to be track cars, so later on they went to a more conventional setup, or a little bit more forgiving for it. This being said, body control is still quite impressive. At a sort of 50 to 70 mile an hour jaunt down a back road, the car keeps itself very well composed and actually is quite enjoyable. The suspension does seem to loosen up and improve the harder you drive. You can see plenty of that bonnet, which really is quite helpful because there's a lot of it. And even for this sort of stuff, it's not scary, it's not daunting. I am told of the original 13 cars, all 13 still survive, so I've no interest in being the first person to write off a Bristol Fighter. In case you're wondering, a used Fighter can easily command the thick end of £200,000, so in terms of depreciation, they've done quite well. The new ones, as you might imagine, do cost a little bit more, but you are essentially ordering a new car, which means you can have pretty much anything you like. Exterior colours, essentially unlimited. Interior materials choice, very varied. And apparently, Bristol customers in period did go for a wide combination of materials. This one has a surprisingly large amount of carbon fibre in it, but more traditional people would go with wood. You could also have aluminium. I suppose if you wanted, you could have Alcantara or suede in your car. More or less anything. The sky is the limit, and I'm told that was one of the things that really appealed about Bristol's. One of the most exciting things about what SLJ Hackett are doing is they intend to actually build the one car Bristol never did, the Turbo. In fairness, I'm not really driving this car right about now thinking, you know what this needs? Double the power. But there will be an opportunity coming soon for one very, very lucky and discerning individual to own the only one. There will not be anything else like it ever again. And that's quite cool. In fact, I'm pretty sure that most Bristol customers are very happy at the fact most people would turn their nose up at spending 200 grand on something like this, because that's all part of the appeal. So let's try and tell you some more useful stuff about this car that the internet isn't going to give you. Wind noise is actually surprisingly minimal, perhaps as a result of those aerodynamics. However, road noise is pretty bad. Visibility is very good. The A-pillar is fairly thick, but also very close to you, so you can see really nicely. It's not in the way at all. These windows are comical. That's it. That's about it. Probably just about good enough for a toll booth, but you don't want to try feeding a Big Mac through that. Obviously, with there being so few of these in the world, I don't really want to give it any beans. I'm going to take it easy today. Only joking. It's a Bristol Fighter. When else am I going to get the chance to do this? My job. The thing is, the old girl actually seems quite keen on that kind of treatment as well. The engine, as you might imagine, is absolutely mighty. It's got endless reserves of torque and power. The red line is only 5,500, but honestly, it may as well be 10,000. That's the kind of impression you get from it. The harder you go, the better the suspension copes with the road as well, although it's no Elise. One contemporary review complained that the thing felt simultaneously a little stiff and a little soft at the same time. Ford Mustangs I've driven have got that same sort of feeling, and I can sense what they mean with this. Now, that particular car was one of the Fighter S. I say one of. What I mean is they only ever built one. Originally, Bristol said they were going to build about 20 of these a year. That was optimistic. Heel and toe actually pretty easy in this thing too. That's nice. Come on. Oh. It's still got the goods to impress, you know. It really does. What a magnificent machine. And I'm glad that I found a road that really suits its talents. The noise is very characteristic Viper V10. It doesn't scream or howl or wail. Sounds like a distant Audi Quattro. In the unlikely event you ever find yourself in a Bristol Fighter, reverse all the way over and up. Great visibility on this road as well, which means I can actually have a little bit of fun in relative safety. And this is geared very, very long. Normally I wouldn't boot a car in first, but this one I can. Yeah, it's over 50 in first. It's over 50 in second as well. Blimey. Oh, the steering is a weakness. I really hope that the steering will be absolutely amazing, but it's just not. Doesn't really want to talk to you. Feels like the wheels are doing a lot, but it isn't communicating to you. Let's tip it in a bend, see how it holds on. The tyres are reasonably fresh. It'll do it. It will do it. Fiesta ST, it is not, but I'm impressed. and it is actually giving me the confidence to do this kind of stuff, which I wasn't sure it would. Oh, yes! Oh, I'm driving a Bristol Fighter! Never thought I'd be able to say that. Just never. Not ever. I thought a couple of these might have been out there, but it was the kind of car I figured was just locked away in a cave, never ever to see the light of day. Apparently a few of them are, but many of them still get used and enjoyed by their owners. Much of Bristol, the company's later business, was actually restoring their earlier cars. SLJ were apparently the second biggest firm in the world after Bristol themselves that did that. So if ever anyone was going to have a chance to bring these back to life, they're probably the right people. Supercar, it certainly isn't. Something like a 550 and much better steering. Also, very nice gearbox, really tractable big engine, but does feel considerably more refined, and of course will be much easier to find parts and support and everything else for. So what kind of company was Bristol then? I mentioned that Richard Hackett had some involvement with them, both in their later and earlier days. He gave me a couple of entertaining anecdotes. When he was a very young, spotty-faced lad, his father was trying to buy an MG, but it all fell through and he got his money back. The Bristol showroom was not too far away, and he said, "Dad, you should go and buy a car from those people. They're much more interesting." So he did. However, there was a bit of an argument because the car he had already had a wireless in it, and he didn't really want to pay too much money to put a new one in the Bristol. He wanted to simply move one over. And they said, no, you've got loads and loads of money, you're buying one of our cars, you must be minted, you can pay for a new one. He said, no, that's not the case. So a bet was made. They had a piece of red carpet lined out in the middle of the showroom, and they blindfolded Tony Crook, the boss of Bristol at the time, and the father. They said whoever could get the furthest down the red carpet without falling off of it would be the winner. Richard's dad won and got a half-price stereo. Richard got a job. Not so long after that, he was in the office at Kensington High Street and could hear this unusual sound coming from Mr. Crook's office. There was the noise of cars being raced, tyres screeching, engines revving, and a commentator describing a race. All he could hear was, "That's a fantastic line from Mr. Crook, absolutely marvellous driving." He opened the door to the office, not sure what he was going to find, and sat there in his chair at his desk was Tony Crook, race helmet on, child steering wheel there, listening to a recording of his former glory. He turned to the young Richard and said, "Did you not hear, boy? Your chairman's just done a very good lap. Applaud him." You don't get people like that anymore. Every Bristol is a rare and unusual car, a very special thing indeed, and I'm surprised they managed to find homes for as many as they did of these. But I'm so glad some people were brave enough to buy them. Because actually, I think the world could use a few more Bristols. Well, there you go. I don't really know what else it is I could say about this car. It is one of the very last of the Bristols. The good news, particularly if you've enjoyed this video, is that I have been invited by a couple of people to drive some of the older ones as well. So if that's the kind of content you'd like to see on the channel, please do comment about that down below, and I shall try and make it happen. Oh, who's kidding anyone? I'm going to make it happen, okay? They're seriously cool cars. And if you happen to be sat there going, "Ugh, Bristol, common car for common types, I've got something much more interesting you can drive," well, put your money where your mouth is. Do drop me a line. The details of how to do that are in the description down below. For now, though, all I really have to say is thanks to you for watching. A huge thank you, of course, to SLJ Hackett for giving me the opportunity, and to this car's owner for allowing it all to take place. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already.